Alrighty, everyone. Go ahead and kick things off. Hello, my name is Laura Higley. I am the VP of Marketing at UNIFI Labs. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for Revit Frequently Asked Questions Answered. Today, we have UNIFI Senior BIM Specialist and Revit expert Karen Pierce as our host. Karen has over 10 years of experience in the AEC industry as a designer, a BIM manager, and as a software training specialist. She has been through CAD to Revit transitions, fought for BIM analytics enhancements, and much more throughout her career. Here at UNIFI, she leads the BIM specialist team and works to optimize the customer experience. Today, Karen will cover learning Revit, building Revit content, becoming more efficient with Revit, keyboard shortcuts, some basics around Dynamo content, monitoring model health, and much more. I do want to quickly mention through all these points, we will be weaving in the answers to several of the questions many of you asked upon registration. And speaking of answering questions, I do want to encourage everyone in the audience to utilize the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window to answer or ask questions and make comments as they come to mind throughout today's presentation. Please don't be shy. Our goal is to ensure before the close of today's webinar, your Revit skill set is enhanced whether you are a beginner or a seasoned Revit user. And with that being said, I'll hand the floor over to Karen to get the presentation started. Karen, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you guys really very much for joining us today. I'm actually going to start my video so you guys can see me. Like Laura was saying, we got well over 60 questions. I have a lot of them that I'm going to be covering, but we may actually be having a part 2. So definitely stay tuned to be able to get some of that from us. So let's go ahead and get started with the very first one we have. So this question has come from Comet Electric. And really what they wanted to know is really what's new with the new version of Revit that's out. So I'm sure many of you have already heard this, but slanted walls is definitely one of the top build items of Revit 2021. And it's definitely going to be a pretty key feature for architects. So long overdue. We also have generative design with Revit 2021. You do need the, I believe it's called the AEC collection to be able to take advantage of the generative design add-in, but it's really pretty cool, especially if you're thinking about trying to re-coordinate your workspace due to COVID-19. They're really able to take in, I guess you could say, a set of rules and give you the most optimal positions available. We're also actually finally, and I think I put this request in the Autodesk message probably years ago, but we're now able to actually link and unload, therefore, PDFs and images. So anytime you're actually importing, all of you guys know is that it's going to be attaching it to the file size, making your models more and more clumsy and slow than all the options that are available. So being able to actually link these keeps them externally and easily able to be updated when the time comes. We also have custom workspaces. So with custom workspaces, while Revit already gave you the option to be able to remove tabs within the workspace, now we're able to actually just basically set up a profile, more or less, based upon what discipline it is that I'm working in. And just some other improvements that we have, schedule improvements. So GCs have been calling for this pretty heavily, as well as other contractors, but now we're able to actually color code in rows your door schedules, and you can actually pick and choose that color. So while we have green showing up here, if you put it to the light gray, it prints off really very nicely to be able to better visualize your schedule data. We also have some improvements with path of travel, as well as panel schedules. Now, electrical engineers don't get too excited about panel schedules, especially if you're based in the US. A lot of the panel schedules are more going to be geared towards the EU, UK, and some of the difficulties that they've been having with previous versions of Revit. And if you can believe it, as of later last month, we're already on 2020.1. So I just took a quick screenshot to kind of give you guys some visualization here with some of the new updates. I definitely got to tell you that probably my most favorite feature is the ability to actually reset shared coordinates. Many companies continuously struggle with shared coordinates, acquiring, publishing, specifying. moving that dreaded shared parameter, not shared parameter, but that shared project point, project base point, can definitely be confusing. So essentially to be able to start over rather than correcting an already clumsy model is something I'm really quite excited about. Now, we also have to talk about the importance of minor versions. So this actually came from one of our customers, so BHP engineers, and what they really wanted to know was kind of the talking issues that might be occurring. Models definitely tend to crash if you're not on the same minor version of Revit. And why might that be? So really what happens when Autodesk releases a new version of Revit, and not just new version 2020 to 2021, but rather the minor versions I'm talking about here, they're always incorporating a number of bug fixes. And that's also very typically why whenever you go to implement the newest version of Revit at your company, many companies actually will wait till that first service pack has come out, 2021.1, for example, because it incorporates a number of bug fixes. There's also a number of enhancements that are actually implemented. So the particular question that we're answering here really is the model talk issues, particularly with 2020.2.2 versus 2020.2. And really what happened is that there were so many enhancements with 2020.2 that 2020.2.2 is actually a means of fixing those. A big issue that was actually addressed was in regards to the family editor. Basically what was happening is that it had to improve stability because whenever somebody was going to create similar, essentially the file would hang up. And that also caused a number of corruptions to occur. But you know, it's really, I'm going to show you a few techniques too to kind of ensure you guys are all on the same minor version. And I think they'll really like them. So more Revit questions. These particular questions have come from companies like Sanchez Palmer, ARUP, and Communitor Atticus. So these questions are really kind of geared towards, hey, now that we kind of know some of what's coming with 2021, what's the minimum computer setup that's required? So as you can see here, I do have the minimum. I believe we got a question that asked if Revit was able to work on 4 GB of RAM. It is not able to do that. You see the minimum requirement here is 8. I have actually found that, you know, minimum doesn't even cut it. I've worked on minimum-based computers, and while I can actually install Revit, I might be able to do something like a simple house. When it comes to actually working on projects, it's darn near impossible. And I can talk to a few more questions and details into that a little bit later. I've really worked on only values and sometimes even performance level computers. And what you're really going to want to do is actually identifying your user requirements. You know, there's the whole idea of in a company you have, for lack of a better word, the grunts, you know, the interns that definitely are in Revit day in, day out. They're doing a lot of detailing, they're doing a lot of this. And while they're really particularly tasked with doing things like creating sheets and creating views and documentation, they're not really going to be doing any sort of renderings or extended animations that are going to be typically needing to have that more performance level metrics. There's also the computer setup you might have to require for the BIM champs. So these are basically your BIM managers, people like myself, advanced users that not only do we use Revit all day long, but we do it for more product support, and we're really delving into things like the nooks and crannies of the program to really help turn the design concepts into more of a modeled reality. And then, well, you're going to have those gurus, those viz wizards that are using programs like Adobe Photoshop, SketchUp. I would not recommend any of those types of users that are really going to be taking a lot of renderings to be on anything less than performance. So definitely keep these types of metrics in mind there. So other questions we had geared towards those same sets is really kind of learning Revit or just learning how to. So the idea of when people think of Revit, I want to sidetrack here for just a second. When people think of Revit, they're really thinking of, hey, this is BIM. But Revit's not BIM. Revit is a tool of BIM. There's really a lot of other applications that are required for the BIM process to take place. tools like perhaps Power BI, maybe a little bit of programming. We're definitely going to be covering Dynamo later, for example. So learning Revit isn't just about learning Revit. It's about learning so much more than that. So I have put together here a number of online resources. Pluralsight is one of my favorites. They're constantly, by the way, they do have a free trial, but they're constantly discounting their year service if you can buy it. 33%, I've gotten 40% before, so definitely worth your while to check that out, because it's not just Revit again. They have sites on Python, they have sites on Dynamo, all different types of programs that I really, really stand behind. The LinkedIn Learning is also great. You know, once you become a LinkedIn Premium member, not only do you get access to LinkedIn Learning, but you also have a whole bunch of networking capabilities too. So it's really going to be good for more than just enhancing your knowledge. It can be good for enhancing your network too. And in person. So, you know, COVID is lifting up throughout much of the US, and there is a number of in-person classes perhaps starting to take place. We do have a partnership with Microdesk, so definitely check them out. And Leadit is also another one of mine that I really like, again, because of its multi-platform training abilities. You know, getting better with Photoshop or getting better with other design programs, they have that available there. So other questions, kind of getting started with what really does make a good drawing set. So whenever we're talking about a drawing set, we're really most often referring to drawings produced for construction. And there are pages and pages of different drawings across a wide range of scales. And when accompanied by a specification of all the materials, you have installation practices and really the nuts and bolts for that construction contractor to turn the architectural idea into a brick and mortar building. In my opinion, there are many different ways to put together a drawing set, and the results generally look very different from practice to practice, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there are three things that are absolutely consistent: completeness, clarity, and cross-referencing. So drafting for completeness. A drawing set includes everything that really needs to be understood and the things which could be misunderstood in writing. And this requires a lot of drawings, and it's usually communicated through floor plans, site plans. Floor plans are generally produced as a cut through the building. Typically it's set at 4 feet, but you can always adjust that as you might need to. Floor plans might also include things like ceiling plans. So essentially really trying to visualize the layout of your building. And then you have sections and elevations. So basically trying to convey what the building looks like if I was to actually look at perhaps the interior wall elevation or the exterior wall. Also sections of really slices through the building, you know, understanding how my trades coordinate between all my MEP and fire protection. So definitely required there to understand how things sit on top of each other. And then there's always the details, you know, really giving you the ability to zoom in and brings together the whole range of thinking. So understanding how all of these kind of are required and then how they're all going to be cross-referenced that we'll get into later is certainly what you're going to want to start with. And clarity. Line weights, types, scale, annotation types, alignments, layout, orientation, white space. A good drawing set is really very, very clear, leaving nothing to the imagination. All the decisions from design to materials and construction methods are really made, and they're included in the drawings. And importantly, there shouldn't be any contradictions from one drawing to the next. That's really one reason that I love Revit. I can't go back to AutoCAD because what I do in one view will correspond to the other views. And with the good amount of scheduling and actual use of tags and shared parameters, you can really make Revit work for you in a variety of ways. Revit's not perfect, but it's really much better than AutoCAD for producing a good set of drawings. And that really goes into clarity, because to achieve clarity, it's very important that architects understand why they're making a drawing and how the drawing will actually communicate the design intent. Clarity is not just about the information. Again, it's about how. And this takes us right back to cross-referencing. So any job I've ever worked in, before we create the very first sheet in the Revit model, we're talking about page numbers and how that will really all lay out. We have page numbers, section callouts, elevation callouts, details, keynotes, legends. As everyone on this phone definitely knows, buildings are very complex, and individual drawings will really struggle to communicate this complexity on their own. So we really have to rely on the information being spread across this wide range of drawings and subsequently on people being able to shift from drawings to form a comprehensive picture of the whole. So to help people read across and between drawings, that's really where page numbers come in handy. You know, take example, I am doing a condo remodel at the moment, for example. So page numbers, I'm even doing page numbers in a simple condo remodel. I have simply just A101 for my first floor plan, but I actually have A001 to designate a demo. And I have A201 to designate the next phase of the project because I have to have multiple phases. So there's all different types of complexities that with your page numbers actually being properly planned out, you'll be able to very easily cross-reference all the information you're going to need to. So now that we kind of have an idea on basically the basics, you know, that, hey, this is ideas I can use to understand how to learn the program. These are ideas on how I can learn to basically get started, right? Where are you storing all of that? The biggest issue I see in firms of all sizes and shapes is this data silo. And it's breaking away from that. And I'm not just talking about data silos like we might talk about with Dynamo and being able to harness actual data. Really what I'm talking about here is documentation. You know, what is your BIM execution plan and where is it stored? Is it stored where everybody can actually access it? So within UNIFI, you know, UNIFI is absolutely built for Revit content. That's really where we excel, where we can even search by Revit parameter data, but we can actually store things like documents, you know, Word docs, PDFs, text files, Excel even. So really making sure all of this content as it's needed is at your fingertips is really, really powerful. So we have more questions now. These questions, and I kind of put just all of these different companies here, because what we're talking about next is Revit templates. So with Revit templates, I'm really going to start from the basics here. So what is a Revit template? How do you start building one? So I have a huge shout out to ArtSmarter for this. ArtSmarter has helped me over the years many, many times, but they have a great blog talking about just this, where the very first thing you talk about with a Revit template is a chassis. You know, the chassis is ultimately what is going to be built on it. So this is where you start to establish standards like annotation types, title blocks, line weights. You're really trying to increase efficiency here. So the chassis will specifically include text and dimension styles, symbols, and line weights. We'll also have fill patterns, filled region types to be included. So basically your drafting tools, you know, that you're really going to always need to create that set of documentation. The next topic to talk about is the body. So the body will of course build off the chassis, and like different car bodies, they're definitely going to use the same chassis, but this is where you might include specific project type elements. So this is talking about sheet and view setups, title blocks, schedules, standard system families you might even use. But the standard system types are going to probably be specific to the project type. So we have definitely seen customers that have multiple templates based upon this exact idea of the body. So while I'm going to be showing you an alternative in just a little bit, this is definitely something that a lot of our customers are taking advantage of. And of course, last but certainly not least, is the trim. You know, leather, you definitely want to go with leather, cats, dogs, kids. I don't think I'll ever buy another cloth car just because of that very thing. But I'm really an advocate too of, you know, the trim can include things like families. Maybe it's an interior project template and I have furniture that I really want my staff to be using on a typical basis. So it could really start to include actual content. And while I'm an advocate of keeping Revit files as lean as possible, Revit files tend to always get big on their own. You'll notice that when you have heavier templates that are really geared towards the content itself, you're waiting to purge the model till maybe, I don't know, halfway through the job or so, because you don't want to lose all of those starting blocks that you're probably eventually going to need. So what I'm actually going to show you is that there's a few alternatives you can tend to pursue. And while you're taking this dive into creating a new template, and it's definitely going to take time, there's the myth of the perfect template. It's like content. You know, I've been building content for 8 years or so, basically almost since I first started learning Revit. Like I took some junior time and got into starting building content pretty quickly. But the way I built content even 2 years ago is much different than the way I'm going to build content today. And that's really what I want to talk to you guys today about, is the myth of the perfect Revit template. So what do you want to always do first? Well, anytime you're trying to underscore anything new, to identify your scope: who, what, when, where, how. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to set a really good deadline. You're not going to be able to understand the value that you're taking all of this time to actually try to accomplish. The next thing is about, that some people tend to do, especially people that are rushed, people that don't want to take the time to, or don't have the time really, to be able to identify the scope. And that's really being able to convert the project to the template. So they'll basically, what they'll do is they'll take an existing project that was successful, that they had a lot of lessons learned on, and they're going to take that project and do a file save as. And they're going to name it as their template file. They're going to delete the existing geometry, they'll do a selective purge, they'll delete views, they'll rename the file, of course. But really what I found, the more you go further with Revit, I've been here with point number 2, I've been there, done that, and it works. Like it does work. But as you move forward, you actually will start to realize it's not enough. There were things on that project you might have forgotten about. There's things on that project that maybe you learned on another project. And it's really about making sure you're able to think things through, again, identifying the scope: who, what, when, where, how. And that'll help you fill in any gaps that perhaps the converting the project to the template is going to do for you. And we did have a question come in, sort of, is there anything I can do to get started quickly, especially with shared parameters? So right here, the NBS, it's the National BIM Library, they actually do provide the ability to download a shared parameter file. And it's got all of the basic parameters that they feel a company should have. I do think it's geared more towards architects, but I certainly could be wrong. I'm pretty sure there's probably some MEP engineer parameters in there. But by able to actually download that, and I know a few companies that actually use this, but you might even already be ahead if you find the right company where the grids might match up or whatever. Basically, the idea is use this as a starting point. Definitely don't depend upon it. There's also a lot of data here. I can kind of highlight it for you, that if it's not just the shared parameters you're looking for, this site can also help you with things like doors, finishes, insulation, roofs. So it can give you a lot of good information to just help you get started. So definitely take advantage of it. It's very useful. So let's then kind of talk about the contents of the Revit template and really specifically what it should have. We talked about the body, the chassis, the body, and the trim, but let's talk about what that chassis should include. So this is really the general annotation and graphic standards. So much of what you see here, line weight, styles, line patterns, can all be found under this additional settings tab. So this additional settings tab will actually have those located for you. I can also go after object styles, annotation symbols, materials. Materials are also, by the way, not just annotation and graphics, but as you see on the next page here, it's also about analytical. So materials have things like physical and thermal properties. So ensuring that not just does it look right, but if I'm going to be doing any sort of energy calculations or light analysis, I'm definitely going to want to make sure my materials are set appropriately. I've also got items here like color fill types, MEP settings, systems themselves, shared parameters again. So shared parameters, keynotes, these are things that are definitely going to probably change over time. Like I said in the previous slide, that National BIM Library can certainly help you get started with this if you're brand new to it. But we also have, there's a keynote manager that is pretty easy, intuitive to use. So definitely also think about how you want to do your keynotes. Do you want to spend time looking at your content to be able to immediately have it tagged, I guess you could say, by what's in that content, or do you want to be more user-defined? So there's a lot of topics to really get into when it comes to keynotes. Import-export settings. Even though we're in Revit, Revit is a proprietary software. So oftentimes you're having to export to CAD or NWC, or DWG rather for CAD, and those are going to be more open availability. So if you're doing any sort of coordination with trades, you're going to want to make sure you spend a little bit of time just to make sure your import and export settings are set the way that they need to be. And then, I'm sorry, kind of forgot about this for a second, but you're taking all of this time with the content and building the template. Give a template guide talking about specifically what's included in here, because that can definitely be an overlooked source of documentation and very, very useful, especially for new users coming into your company. Views. So again, with templates, setting up your views, and not necessarily, I'm not talking about all of the different floor plans you might possibly have or the different ceiling plans, 3D views, elevation sections. I'm really talking about type here, because within your project browser, not only are you going to be able to organize your content according to project browser, so from project to project, anybody jumping into that project will know specifically kind of where to find the content, but I can actually create view types. And with those view types, like if I'm looking at a floor plan interior versus perhaps a floor plan electrical, granted that might not be all within the same discipline or the same model, but the idea is I could actually create, and we're going to get into in a second, a view template associated with that floor plan. So I can go create new floor plan type A, type B, and actually set my views to already correspond to that. So once I found that out, I thought it was really amazing. Definitely just click on edit type and you'll see what I'm talking about within the Revit environment. The next item is filters. So understanding and making sure you have the right graphics to share common properties is going to be something you'll always want to carry from project to project. So something simple here is something like a wall fire rating. So here I can easily color code it red for a 60-hour, but I could also very easily create fill patterns to designate the differences between a 1 hour and a 2 hour. This could also be super useful. I've been a former electrical designer, so I used this when I was creating healthcare facilities, and I had to designate the difference between my life safety and my main feeders, just as a brief example there. View templates. I kind of touched on this with views. I really think it's probably the most important item to really discuss about. You know, we're talking about applying a standard setting here. Anytime too with these view templates, it's really going to be specifically applying what I want it to look like without having to actually go to VG and make those changes myself. It also enables a greater sense of control to ensure that this is exactly what I want it to be throughout my entire project. So I touched on it before with really talking about the body and the trim and avoiding overloading your templates. So the reason for this is that with content in templates, if I think about my chassis, I can actually create different libraries for my content. So I could actually build my chassis specifically to architecture, to interiors even, to electrical, mechanical, plumbing. I could separate it all out and essentially actually create these buckets of information. My body, in turn, is actually the way that we store content in UNIFI. So we're automatically categorizing all of your content for you based upon either that Revit category or the file extension. So I can actually have all my Dynamo scripts, for example, stored together, PDFs stored together, but still maintain independent control of items like my materials and even my entourage. So that way I can really go after what I'm looking for really pretty quickly. And then last but certainly not least is trim. So we're able to not just, hey, we pulled open a category, this is the curtain panels, for example, but I can actually click on the name of this and review items like my parameter data, my types. So it really keeps all of that bloat out of my template now. I can focus on those annotations like we talked about and load the content itself as I need to. So more Revit questions now. So I'm going to try to go through these a lot. I'm probably going to finish that at the top of the hour, but I'm definitely going to try to answer your questions too as I can. So the first one that we have here is Newman pools. So what they asked about was ramps, spot elevations. And I got on the internet and boy, did I find some intel here. So in a plan view, and you can kind of see that I've actually accomplished it, but in a plan view, it is impossible to actually create a spot elevation on a floor plan. It's really going to be geared towards elevations, 3D views, sections. So how do you go about doing it? And then also, how do you even attach walls to a ramp? The trick, draw a floor. So floors can actually be sloped, as you see here. So when I go to create my floor boundary, I can actually create a slope arrow, define my slope. I can determine whether it's the height at my tail, or I can actually input a specific slope requirement. So definitely something you're going to want to do because, well, since it's the floor, my walls are going to actually be able to attach. So no problem there. And while these workarounds and these things that should work, the next question kind of came around as how do you get the stair nosing to be visible in plan view? And unfortunately, there are some things with Revit that we still don't quite have yet. So stair nosings are not displayed. Right here in Autodesk Support, we do have the issue defined. And well, we're being investigated still from 2016 to be investigated for a future release. So I would like to see this is coming, especially since we did finally get PDFs being able to be linked, but certainly be on the lookout. All right, another question we have. So with this one, what the specific question was talking about a smart room finish schedule. So they wanted to know if it was possible to make a standard that automatically fills everything in, that can categorize flooring, casework, etc., into individual schedules, and then maybe possibly creating a multi-category schedule that matches that particular layout. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I do think it can help you bridge that gap there. But whenever you go to create a new schedule, you can actually create a schedule key. So when I create a schedule key, essentially what I'm able to do from there is assign a set of finishes. So my key name could be something like room 1, and room 1 type has these particular finishes in there. And I can actually do these parameters more than just things like rooms. I could absolutely do casework. I could do multiple parameters here. So then in turn, you could create that multi-category schedule as you need to. And essentially what will happen is once I put in that key name, which you can also rename this key name. So, that key name in this particular case is room type, but I can easily delete that and put whatever parameter in that I see fit. So once I do that, then basically once I put in, hey, it equals this, then whatever I have defined here will go ahead and match those appropriate finishes. So I've definitely used key schedules for things like occupancy code requirements, fixture requirements, definitely very, very powerful. And if also worse comes to worse, I'm going to show you a little bit about Dynamo, but Dynamo could also help you because some of the very first things I did in Dynamo was basically get and set parameter data. So basically almost even importing from Excel. So definitely a lot of options for you there. And more questions. So we have questions that are basically now geared towards looking for an easier way to convince my staff that UNIFI is what they should be using. So a little bit of a pitch here that I'm going to be talking about, but basically a lot of companies have known that our product is very powerful and can certainly improve efficiency. So they're really kind of wanting to know what UNIFI can do to better utilize their products. Also, we have questions kind of talking about just really understanding a few things about Revit itself and how to harvest things like container files. So really, why UNIFI Pro? So the thing is about getting organized. So you should see my desktop. I'm sure most people's desktops is the same way. It's a bit scattered because my desktop is built to be a temporary ground that eventually I'm going to clean up and sort, but I haven't cleaned up and sorted it for probably 2 months or so. So getting organized is really the first and foremost on this list. The next thing, now that I've got that underway, is controlling that. There's nothing worse than, I guess you could say, cleaning the living room to find your toddler has thrown all the toys all over the floor again. So being able to gain control, you can effectively stay organized. And then it's gaining visibility. It's not just about being able to search for things like file name, but I'm really going to be able to search by all sorts of different criteria and really, again, kind of ensure I empower my design teams in return. So a little bit about that. So I've kind of shown you these screenshots a bit before, but by browsing through content, I have my folder structure. opening that folder structure up, everything is categorizing itself as it needs to. And then if I'm just interested in the PDFs, I have them all available. And I can actually click on this PDF and view it directly within the UNIFI application to be able to get the actual data I'm looking for. So there's no need to actually ensure it's downloaded or for my user to have the Adobe or Bluebeam access like they might need to. We also have the ability for saved searches. So if your users are going after the same content time and time again, by setting up company level saved searches, I can effectively ensure that, hey, if I need to make sure they have the recessed panels available for them, well, here it is. And you can really honestly get here within 3 clicks. I'm a super fast typer, but I can't beat 3 clicks. We can also have users set up their own saved searches. So this really gives them a sense of power to be able to categorize things like their favorite content that they might have, or content that they rate a certain star level. And then the project question we did have in particular was being able to harvest content. So you can absolutely store container files within UNIFI. I kind of advocate for using the batch export function and just getting everything out of that container file that you possibly can, with perhaps the exception of legends, because legends do have to be managed within container files. But I can actually store Revit files in UNIFI. And when I go to select a source, like I did here, I can see my families, my system types, materials, fill patterns, even CAD links are all available here. So I can easily just grab what I'm looking for and insert it. And this could work for large pieces of data. But just keep in mind, if you really want UNIFI to be a single source of truth, really what we're doing here is going from project to project. So you're not getting around that issue right now of, hey, go to project X and I need this curtain wall family that we did. Now I can actually just look in UNIFI and find the curtain wall family and insert it. And with UNIFI, you know, we're going to do things like automatically upgrade that file. So you don't have to worry about the upgrade process if you do in fact have container files you're having to constantly manage. And then last but certainly not least, we talked about control. So all users can upload content, and in fact, we always encourage it because BIM managers certainly have enough to do. But we do have this vetting process that takes place here. So I'm actually able to encourage my users to upload, and then as they need to, I can approve or reject that content. We also have a full built-in content request platform. So not only if I can't find the content, maybe it doesn't exist, maybe it's definitely something custom that needs to be made, I actually have an internal system directly built into my content management system, so no more emails are getting lost or Slack messages that are forgotten about. It's all really right there. So show you a little bit about that. So this is some ROI in action that we have here. Claudia is definitely using Revit out of the box, not a content management solution, whereas Mike is certainly actually using UNIFI. So you can see how he's opening UNIFI, he's finding the content he needs, he's placing it as a project. And this little green bar here at the bottom is really showing you how far along in the design process Mike is compared to where Claudia is. So we have found UNIFI to actually be almost 2.5 times faster, I'd say, especially with just inserting, finding, and placing content throughout the general design phase. So next, this is all going to be geared towards model health. So the model health questions have come from the companies that you see here. We're going to talk about things like key factors to model health and how they scale with project size. We're going to talk about best practices to follow when trying to keep Revit file sizes down. You know, there's a lot of information out there that Revit file size shouldn't be a concern, but there really is a size limit, especially when you talk about your computer setup like we did earlier. And really just in general, the other questions are really more about model health in general. So here we go. So on a general level with model health, take the time. I mean, how many times have you been faced with pure frustration when a BIM model went on loading perpetually? Or when opening a model or when processing a not too complicated task has really left you waiting and staring at the screen at the expense of your own time? So this is really where we're going to try to start fully understanding this idea. So we have Revit warnings like this. You know, this is talking about a room that was deleted. And while I could argue with you, it's really going to be one of the non-critical warnings. Like, I don't honestly ever care about this. I can also very quickly clear them out. So essentially, I can just just really not worry about it. Then we have other ones that might be a little bit more concerning, elements that have duplicate mark values. So I often see this one when it comes into effect with doors. So with items like doors, you know, people tend to have mark for the door type. So not type, rather, but the number, the door number. They usually use mark for the door schedules. So that is definitely one that you're never going to want to have door 101 in there 2 different times, especially if it's on the 2nd floor. I'd expect maybe 201 or something like that in that case. So definitely something to keep in mind of, hey, warnings that aren't important versus warnings that could definitely affect the way schedules might appear or the way your data ultimately displays. And we also have other warnings. Warnings that are actually not going to allow you to ignore them. I mean, when I have this type of warning here, I actually have to quit sketching. And then it will prompt me about what the issue is. You know, lines must be in closed loops. So I have to either continue sketching, or I can quit sketching, and I'm left really with what I am stuck with. So something to kind of keep in mind of the differences between warnings that are not important, warnings that are important, warnings that you really can't get around. And I'll be showing you project analytics in a bit that can help you understand the differences between critical, not critical, or the ones you want to ignore. So model health. So this was that question that came into place of model size is not the most important. It's right, model size is not the most important, but I don't know if you know this, but there's a rule of 20 when it comes to the RAM that's required to actually be compared, like to actually work in the model. So in order to calculate the necessary RAM for a project, there's the rule of 20. The rule of 20 means that any central file will need to be approximately 20 times its file size in available RAM. So using this rule, essentially a 100 megabyte Revit central file will consume approximately 2 gigabytes of RAM. So keep in mind with that, with those minimum requirements, because a number of other things kind of are affected here. We not only have that model, we have linked models to be concerned with. And while that doesn't quite affect the rule of 20, it definitely does take effect. So the bigger your projects are going to get, the more RAM you really will want to have. And keep in mind, Revit's probably not the only thing on your machine using RAM. You likely have your internal chat going through there. That uses RAM. Outlook uses RAM. So there's a lot of programs out there that will be using that RAM in addition to Revit. So definitely there's a couple good resources for Autodesk on this. So take a look at it and kind of other things too. When we talk about file maintenance best practices, to best execute file maintenance, let's kind of talk about the below. So one is that somebody should take ownership of the model, a bin manager or somebody that can basically, hey, every Monday from 9 to 9:30, the model's unavailable, or something like that. I've done it with mixed results, but when I did it and I enforced it, what I really found is that when I'm able to actually periodically open the model and audit the selected, I can then, you know, purge unused, I can review warnings, but really what I'll do then is also kind of just audit it and I'll compact it. And I'll compact it under a new name, and I'll do that twice. And then I'll essentially rename it back to its original file name. So when I'm able to do that, like really the performance is a night and day difference. And a lot of positivity has come as a result of that. So definitely take into effect of just auditing, purging, file save as to actually compact it, because that little button to compact it doesn't compact it as much as really recreating that central model will do for you. So now that we understand a bit about why model health is important and some of the things to look out for, we do have another product called UNIFI's Project Analytics. So these are going to be some really easy to read dashboards. You're going to really be able to triage your Revit warnings. You can review the Revit minor version, analyze your content. So this is really going to help you gain visibility. So with being able to gain visibility, you'll be able to detect model issues and correct them before they cause these major problems. Also with Project Analytics, this data is as live as the last sync. So that's really unique compared to another platform I'm going to talk about. But on the settings tab, this is where I can categorize those Revit warnings. So highlighted walls overlap, you know, that's going to be non-critical, because I do know Revit tends to think too hard with something like that. but stair top exceeding or cannot match the elevation of the stair, that's critical. That's definitely affecting the constructability of my stair, and I shouldn't have that particular issue. These health scores also kind of tend to help you gain a visibility into the actual health of the particular model you have here. So while we kind of will lock down the critical Revit warnings, because critical, you shouldn't have any in there, but I can actually kind of set my thresholds for non-critical warnings. You know, when does it maybe start to slow down my model? And then I'll be concerned with it and be able to analyze it as it occurs. Revit links, CAD links, imports, imported images, sync time, in-place families, we're looking at all of that to effectively come up with this health score for you. We also look at the content in the model. So in-place families are huge, especially when people start copying and pasting them, because this will wreak havoc on your file size like none other. So not only do I have the element ID here, but I could absolutely go to compare changes. And once I've cleaned up the model, if people are recreating those issues, I can see specifically who's doing that and be able to provide some additional Revit training as might be necessary. And just a little bit more too, we even look at things like plan regions. So when plan regions repeat themselves, like you see here, if I had to adjust one plan region, I wouldn't necessarily be able to adjust another. We had a question come in kind of speaking that kind of reminded me of plan regions. Basically, they could they cut a section and they were able to identify their toilet in that view, but the floor plan that was corresponding to that didn't show up. Plan regions I have seen in the past be a culprit of that. So check out that plan region, make sure you turn them on. If you don't have plan regions, really double check your cut plane, your base, your top view, and just ensure that whatever your view range is set to, that it actually should include that. Also make sure things like plumbing fixtures are on. So there's a lot there, and essentially basically my way of troubleshooting visibility is turn it all on. You know, undo your view range overrides you might have, undo your view template. There's this great little thing of temporary view properties in the bottom Revit bar to kind of hover over. Use that as a keyboard shortcut even. So with keyboard shortcuts, we kind of talked about it just in the agenda a bit, but my keyboard shortcut for keyboard shortcuts is KS. So as soon as I get into KS, from there, I'm really going to be able to set those shortcuts for tips that I need all the time. Like I'm always cutting sections, for example. So the very first keyboard shortcut I set is SE for section, because that, you know, those keys are right next to each other, and it's super intuitive in my mind that that's specifically what I need to do. So we can set up calls as we might need to, or we can really take future webinars to talk about. You guys asked a lot of good questions. So like I said, we're probably going to have another one, as I introed earlier, but talking about things in more detail is definitely something I'm always up for. So don't hesitate to reach out to support at, and we can schedule some of those calls as necessary. So Revit question again, model health was really about, can we just do this in Revit? You can. With the BIM interoperability tools, you can absolutely do this in Revit as is. So what you will need to have is the BIM interoperability downloaded. So it is free with Revit, but what you'll also need is access to the Power BI desktop app. So you're able to get a free trial if you're looking to work with Power BI on your own, meaning you're not looking to share your workspace. You can actually get away with the free version, but it's only $9.99 a month. And with the BIM interoperability tools, they will provide you with a template so you can actually get started a little bit out of the box there. And there's some videos available for you too online. But this is just a few of those dashboards that are available. So I could take a look at things like corrupt elements. I can take a look at items like, let's see here, we got the purgeable elements available. I can see model groups that might be burdening my file, linked CAD, hidden elements, work sets, and design options. So a lot of trending data is available here. The big key difference though between this tool set and project analytics is that this tool set has to be run. Somebody has to take ownership of this and physically run the tool on a regular basis. With project analytics, that data is just constantly accumulating based upon the last user sync. All right, so I'm going to rush through this because I do want to get to some of the Q&A here. I'm almost out of breath, but really the Dynamo part. And this is one I'm probably going to look to make a bigger presentation on, because there were so many questions that came in from all of these great companies. So the first thing was really about, is Dynamo necessary? So yes, and there's a lot of resources out there that have the top 10 reasons, the top 5. I kind of took the top 3. And the first one really was for me is automate. Automate, automate, automate. There's nothing more boring than creating sheets all day long, creating views all day long, especially as a project is getting started. So Dynamo is fantastic at doing that. I think even as far as the second point goes, accessing your building data, I talked about it a bit in the earlier call, earlier part of the conversation. The first things I did with Dynamo was getting get parameters, set in parameters, because I was having to push room data into my ceiling tags. And there's really no way good to do that out of the box with Revit. So with Dynamo, I was able to actually pull information from rooms to put them into my ceiling tags, and it worked out swimmingly. The other option too is to explore multiple designs. And I think this is really where Dynamo was really taking off. And that's where we got the generative design tool from Autodesk now, because they also wanted to make it more user-friendly. As you can see here, you know, Dynamo is coding in a way. It's visual programming, so it's a little easier than knowing exactly how to code, you know. But when I pull content, I can basically go, hey, I want to look at all of the rooms within Revit. So now that I've done that, well, I want to see all of those element numbers, and now I can actually get a list. I'm not going to be able to just get the category and get a list, because I actually have to translate them to elements first to really be able to see that. So there's a lot of computer logic that has to be thought about. And a big a couple questions kind of came in. Really was talking about how to learn Dynamo. So those resources I gave you earlier, Pluralsight, LinkedIn Learning, there's really just a ton of free scripts out there though too. I'll be taking advantage of one in particular that I'll show you a bit. I'm kind of showing you the power of Dynamo, but being able to just get online, start Googling it. There's a ton of forums. There's a ton of free resources out there. So definitely don't hesitate. And really the biggest thing I would probably advise you with, well, there's two. The first is if you're wondering where to get started, and this is how I'm wondering to get started, perhaps getting into the Revit API. You really just got to do something. You got to have a project, well, probably not a project, but a task, but have a task that you want to accomplish with Dynamo. That way you have this end goal actually available for you, so you're able to make your progress there. Just trying to get in there and learn doesn't motivate you enough as having a task to complete, and I found that to be really beneficial. The other one is actually start from the end. So like you see here, like if I was to think about, let's see, I don't know, let's say I wanted to push parameter data into my room schedule from my floors, something like that. While I would be tempted to, hey, I know I need rooms because that is what I have to ultimately push into, what I might actually want to do is go, hey, what is that final block that I might need? And actually work your way backwards. So that feedback came from Marcelo. I took one of his Dynamo classes, and it was really quite worth every penny, working your way backwards and going front. And again, having that task at hand that I needed to accomplish really gives you that motivation and that click factor to really get started utilizing it pretty efficiently. We can actually use Dynamo, well, UNIFI, to manage Dynamo scripts. So when I was creating Dynamo scripts for a former company of mine, one of the big items really was how to manage it. Especially if people were just accessing on the network, they'd make a quick change, they'd save the file, and then I didn't have basically a way to manage that. So with UNIFI, I can store these Dynamo scripts. And while clicking on that icon is actually not going to launch Dynamo for me, because like you see here, it's got 0 results really compatible with 2018. Maybe that will change, but I did have to go ahead and show all files like you see here. And if I click on it, it says, hey, I can't open it, but do you want to open in the folder? So that is what I did here. So from now I have this folder path. I can click and drag it to my infamous desktop. and be able to really, I guess you could say, manipulate and use the file from there. There is a question that came up talking about larger scale management, so I'll address that in a second. But for everybody here, I'm actually going to show you a little bit about the power of Dynamo. I did this for a customer of ours, and what I'm doing here is that they needed all of their doors renamed because their current door structure as it stands really wasn't actually kind of designated for a different sector of their company. So what I did, they had their container file and they wanted to export. So basically with this script, and again, a shout out to Evolve Labs for providing all sorts of free Dynamo stuff. But here we are able to actually look at all of the different families. I've categorized them as looking at all the different doors. I set a Boolean mask to be able to really look at that. And now that I've really isolated only my door families, I'm taking a code block and looking for door underscore, replacing that with door underscore Australia. And I've gone ahead and hit process. And depending upon how fast your computer is, I have about 16 gigs of RAM and basically a Dell laptop. So it took about 1.5 minutes to run the script. But you can see there now that all of my doors have been now renamed to suit the Australia division. And then I'll go ahead and batch export this up to UNIFI. So how do we really get buy-in? How do we manage Dynamo for the company as a whole? As with anything, as is with template remanagement, with content restructuring, on and on throughout the organization, it's always about perception, mindset, and promotion. And gosh, I hate the word perception. An old colleague of mine was very much, my perception is my reality. And I think there's some truth to that because it's all about all of these different factors: suitability, mindset, awareness, practicality, workflow, effectiveness. And the people that are creating the graphs, the Dynamo graphs is really what they're called, not so much scripts, but old habits die hard. As we expand all of this out, not having that buy-in can have a lot of pushback. But when they're actually able to really collaborate together, what ends up happening is that if these graph creators are communicating with the projects, with the users, with the designers themselves, they're really able to go inward and expand that adoption as needed. So this is really just that big picture on the communication that really has to happen here. And it's actually an excess of communication. I don't think I've ever seen somebody overly communicate to the upper management and to the project architects or project managers that are ultimately responsible for the project's delivery. I don't think I've ever seen, I guess you could say, too much communication happening. So definitely get out there and communicate those needs there. So with that, we only have a couple of minutes here, so Laura, I'll let you lead here on any Q&A that has come through.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karen, for that very informative presentation. As she mentioned, we've got a lot of questions ahead of time, and then a few came through. Let's try to get to one or two here. Karen, will there ever be a backwards compatible version of Revit, i.e. save to an earlier version like AutoCAD does?
I don't ever think so. I love that. I've seen a couple of things that have tried to get close, but yeah, I really don't see that it's happening, and I think that's really kind of on the way Revit is built. Revit wasn't actually originally built by Autodesk, and I think they even acquired AutoCAD. So while AutoCAD can certainly save down, and that's definitely come in handy a few times in my life, it's definitely, I don't see that happening with Revit simply because of the complex structure and the way it is, and the way the software is having to be built there. So, sorry.
Yeah, got you. Thanks for your opinion on that one. And then just one more question here. What is the best way to create code ceilings for interior design drawings in a Revit model? I'm always being told that it will make the file size heavy.
Let's get your contact information. I'd like to have a little bit more perspective on that before I answer it. Code ceilings can definitely be done in a couple different ways.
Cool. All right, Marlon, we will be reaching out to you after to talk about that question in more detail, as well as the other people who asked questions. Apologies, we got to as many as we can. As Karen mentioned, we may be doing a part 2, so let us know in the chat box now before you go today. If we had a part 2 of this webinar, would you be interested in attending? And with that, we are at the end of the hour here, so I just wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. It was a true honor and pleasure to have you, and appreciate your wonderful comments and participation throughout, as well as the many wonderful questions you submitted ahead of time. If you want to learn more about UNIFI, please visit us at unifilabs.com, or you can email us directly at sales@unifilabs. The recording to this will be sent out later on. And again, thanks so much for your time, and please have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care now. Bye.